Welcome, curious soul, to Tales of the Tattered Book. I am your host, the keeper of the book. With each passing moment, new horrors appear on these weathered pages, yearning to be told. As I open this arcane tome, remember, knowledge comes at a price, and some truths are better left unspoken. The tattered book opens once more, its pages glowing with an eerie yellow light. Tonight, dear listeners, we delve into a tale of modern obsession and ancient horror. In a world of digital art and cryptocurrency, an unsuspecting soul stumbles upon a gateway to realms beyond human comprehension. Gather close and heed the story of the King's Mark.
Jake's eyes were growing heavy as he mindlessly scrolled through the NFT marketplace. Another night spent staring at the endless pixelated artworks and procedurally generated avatars. Another night wasted in search of that elusive digital treasure. It was past midnight when his cursor hovered over the log-out button when a peculiar image caught his attention. The title was The King's Mark, 6 of 6. At first glance, the image seemed deceptively simple. Concentric circles surrounding a stark black void, all bound by a vibrant yellow band. But as Jake leaned closer to his monitor, the artwork began to change. The circles blurred and shifted, twisting inward like a spiral, pulling him deeper into its depths. From the center, something emerged, a symbol formed of writhing yellow light that both repelled and attracted him. Though he'd never seen anything like it before, the design felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream. A faint hum filled the room, so subtle he wasn't sure if he was hearing it or feeling it. The symbol pulsed in time with the sound, each beat sending ripples of unease through his mind. Fighting against the growing disorientation, Jake checked the listing details. The description was sparse, just a note about being part of a limited series. But the price. Jake blinked, sure he was misreading the numbers. For such a rare piece, it was absurdly low. His cursor moved without conscious thought. One click, and the King's Mark was his. Over the next few days, Jake found himself constantly checking for more NFTs from the series. Each night found him diving deeper into the digital abyss, setting up alerts, joining Discord channels, haunting forums where collectors whispered about rare finds. The search became a fever, an obsession that kept him awake until dawn, painted his room in sickly light. Then, buried in an obscure subreddit thread, he found his only promising lead. A user called Him Who Is Not To Be Named claimed to possess pieces 2 and 3 of the collection. The post was 4 years old. Jake messaged the user multiple times, but received no response. Desperation drove him deeper into investigation. Following digital breadcrumbs through forgotten forums and abandoned social media accounts, cross-referencing usernames and fragments of information, a pattern emerged. His programming background helped him access archived pages and cached data, until finally, Jake found what he needed. A shipping address from an old Amazon transaction. Better than nothing. Rain lashed against the cab's windows, a relentless drumming that seemed to match Jake's rising pulse. As the taxi pulled to the curb, he took a deep breath, paid the driver, and stepped out into the downpour. Water immediately soaked through his jacket, the cold droplets running down his neck and back. The building stood on the east side, its facade crumbling from decades of neglect, looking even more foreboding under the grey, weeping sky. Most names on the buzzer panel had faded beyond recognition, except for Unit 503, its label completely blank. The front door's lock hung broken from its mount. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered erratically across water-stained walls. The elevator displayed an out-of-order sign, leaving only the stairs. 5th floor. A single working bulb lit the hallway. Unit 503's door stood slightly ajar, a thin slice of darkness visible through the gap. Common sense told Jake to turn back, but the thought of those NFTs pulled forward each step. The stench hit first, decay and something else, something chemical that burned the nostrils. A computer monitor's blue glow provided the only light, revealing takeout containers on every surface, their contents long since transformed into something else entirely. Through the open bathroom door lay exactly what Jake had feared, an occupant in the tub, the water long dried, leaving stains better left unexamined. But the wall drew all attention, crude letters painted in rusty brown. "Have you seen the yellow sign?" Forcing down rising nausea, Jake approached the computer. The login screen's prompt yielded easily to those words from the wall. The crypto wallet appeared, and with trembling fingers, Jake transferred its contents to his own wallet. No time to examine them here. No time to call anyone. Just get out.
Jake?
Sarah's voice barely registered. His eyes remained fixed on the screen, on that hypnotic pattern that had become his world.
Jake!
Her voice was firmer now. He felt a hand on his shoulder. This gesture forced him to look away from the monitor, though the yellow circles still burned in his vision. Sarah was standing there, but for a moment he struggled to focus on her face.
You've been at this for over a week. When was the last time you actually slept?
"I'm fine," he mumbled, but Sarah's concerned expression told him she wasn't convinced.
What's so special about this NFT anyway?
She leaned in, squinting at the screen.
It's just circles. Yellow circles. Not even particularly good ones.
Jake struggled to explain. How could he describe what he saw? The way the image moved, breathed, called to him. "I am not sure. There's something about it," he managed. "Something important."
Remember our weekend hikes?
Her voice softened.
Fresh air? Actual sunlight? Maybe we could…
But Jake had already turned back to the screen. Sarah stood there a moment longer, then sighed and walked away. Only after her footsteps faded down the hall did Jake finally open his wallet to examine his new acquisitions. His heart skipped a beat when he realized that the wallet contained not 2 NFTs as promised, but 3. With a trembling hand, he clicked the first one. The King's Mark, 4 of 6, showed a Victorian ballroom, masked figures whirling in an endless waltz, while at their center, a figure in a bone-white mask conducted their dance, his yellow robes catching light that had no source. The King's Mark, 3 of 6, revealed a palace chamber where nobles in rich attire gathered, their faces frozen in expressions of mounting dread as they gazed upon something just beyond view. In the shadows behind them, yellow drapes stirred without wind. The King's Mark, 2 of 6, displayed a pale mask floating in darkness, its eyes somehow meeting Jake's through the screen. Jake's hands trembled with excitement as he examined each new piece. 3 more. The collection was growing. Hour after hour, he studied every detail. The conductor's graceful movements, the noble's frozen terror, the mask's penetrating gaze. His bloodshot eyes burned from the screen's glow, but he couldn't stop, didn't want to stop. The masked figures began to blur together, the yellow drapes rippling with each exhausted blink. When sleep finally took him, his face was still bathed in the monitor's sickly light, his dreams already waiting. It pulled him deeper, the pulsing yellow symbol growing until light consumed everything. When his vision cleared, he stood at the edge of a vast lake, its water so dark and yet impossibly reflective, a mirror of polished obsidian that caught the starless sky above in its depths. Twin black suns hung in the sky above, and on the cliffs overlooking the water, a city that shouldn't exist clawed its way toward the heavens. Jake stood transfixed, unable to move as he took in the impossible vista before him. The city pulsed with a sickly yellow glow that seemed to seep from between its stones, casting long shadows that moved independent of the twin suns. At its center, a vast tower rose higher than physics should allow, its surface writhing with shapes that might have been birds or something far worse, their forms too distant to distinguish clearly. As he watched, movement caught his eye, a procession emerging from the city's depths. From every street and alley, figures emerged, all dressed in the same tattered yellow robes. They moved in perfect unison along the winding paths toward the city gates, their synchronized motion suggesting not a crowd but a single organism with countless parts. As they drew closer, Jake could see that beneath their hoods lay only darkness, yet somehow he felt their gazes fixed upon him. Their procession wound upward, their forms now stark silhouettes against towers that pierced the starless sky, their angles wrong in ways that made his mind recoil. He awoke with a start, the word Carcosa on his lips, though he didn't know why. The obsession around the King's Mark became a mania, a need. His life balance plummeted. At work he missed deadlines, zoned out during meetings, and his boss had already given him 2 formal warnings. His relationship with Sarah also deteriorated rapidly. Date nights were forgotten, conversations became one-sided, and the warmth between them cooled to a palpable chill. Despite Sarah's attempts to reconnect with her loved one, Jake couldn't stop, didn't want to stop. He had to complete the set, had to understand. Then strange things began to happen. Yellow flowers sprouted from the cracks in the sidewalk outside his apartment, despite the winter chill. He caught glimpses of robed figures in his peripheral vision. One morning, Jake noticed his reflection in the mirror seemed off. For a split second, he could have sworn he saw himself wearing a pallid white mask. He shook his head, and his normal reflection returned. Sarah's voice drifted from the kitchen, heavy with concern.
Are you okay in there?
In the bathroom mirror, the bone-white mask remained, but when he reached up to touch it, he felt only skin. "Fine," he called back, his voice sounding distant even to his own ears. Just fine." As days passed, reality began to slip away from Jake. Shadows stretched longer than they should, bending at impossible angles when he wasn't looking directly at them. Objects in his apartment shifted positions between blinks, as if rearranging themselves when his back was turned. The city's constant hum transformed into something else, a rhythmic chanting in a language that hurt to hear. But it was the yellow that truly marked his descent. At first, the color seemed merely more noticeable. A passing taxi too bright against the grey winter sky, his neighbor's curtains suddenly luminous in the afternoon light. Then it began to seep into the edges of his vision, a gilded haze that crept inward day by day. Soon, Jake viewed everything through this amber lens, the familiar world transforming into something alien and wrong beneath its sickly glow. One night, as he pored over the NFTs for the 1,000th time, his screen began to flicker with symbols, ancient glyphs that twisted and reformed into words his mind could barely comprehend.
Seeker of our truth, your devotion echoes across the void. The king in yellow stirs from his slumber. In tattered robes he awaits. Will you heed his call?
His fingers moved across the keyboard of their own accord, typing the response that felt carved into his soul. Yes, my king. The final 2 NFTs appeared in his wallet the next morning. Jake didn't question how or why. The King's Mark, 5 of 6, revealed a chamber dominated by a throne of twisted black stone. The throne was empty, save for a tattered yellow robe draped across it. But it was the king's mark, 1 of 6, that made Jake's breath catch. In it, he saw again that vast lake beneath twin black suns, and rising above it, the impossible spires of Carcosa reached toward a starless sky, the place from his dreams. The collection was complete, but this was not the end. When arranged in a certain order, an order Jake somehow intuited, the 6 images formed a QR code. The scan revealed a URL, and beneath it, a prompt for a password. Could this be another dead end, or perhaps it was a test to see if he was worthy of receiving an invitation into the king's court? Numbers, letters, phrases, nothing granted him access to what lay beyond. His frustration mounted until Sarah found him at his desk, his bloodshot eyes darting between the images.
Jake, this has to stop.
She pleaded, tears in her eyes.
You need help. We need help. Please, let's talk to someone.
Shh, Jake hissed, never looking away from the screen. I can't hear them when you're talking.
Hear what? Jake, there's nothing.
Shut up! His voice cracked with desperate intensity. Just shut up and let me listen. The whispers that had haunted his dreams grew louder, more insistent. Each NFT seemed to sing its own note in an impossible chorus until finally Jake understood. Yes, my king. I hear you now, he whispered, his lips moving in sync with the ancient syllables. H-A-S-T-U-R Hastur. The screen went black. Then, slowly, a yellow text appeared.
The king in yellow welcomes you to Carcosa.
Reality shattered. The walls of Jake's room melted like wax, colors bleeding into one another. The floor lurched away beneath him as the air thickened with the taste of ancient dust. His familiar world dissolved, replaced by paradoxical architecture. Vast spires that twisted in ways that denied physics, their geometries an affront to reason. Before him stretched that eternal landscape he'd glimpsed in his dreams. Twin black suns hanging in a starless sky, while below, masked figures in yellow robes gathered to witness his arrival. His feet carried him forward along paths where steps ascended and descended simultaneously, where a single stairway could lead both up to a tower and down into an abyss. The yellow-robed figures parted before him, bowing in reverence or mockery. He couldn't tell which. Each step led him deeper into the nightmare city, through archways whose angles bent in 5 dimensions at once, past windows that showed vistas of other impossible worlds. The great tower opened before him, its interior a cathedral of corruption. Yellow light poured from everywhere and nowhere, illuminating walls covered in frescoes that depicted acts of such magnificent horror that Jake's mind refused to fully comprehend them. Statues lined the hall, each one a blasphemy in bronze and gold, figures with too many limbs frozen in poses of ecstasy or agony. All around him, robed figures swayed and danced to music that sounded like screaming stars, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. One of the marionette's head snapped towards him, its limbs twitching in sudden violent bursts that suggested something inside was trying to remember how flesh should move. And there, atop a twisted stairway that spiraled upward like a broken spine, waited the throne of twisted black stone. Upon it sat a figure. Tattered yellow robes draped a form that seemed to shift between solid and void, crowned by a pale mask that both was and wasn't a face. As it rose to greet him, Jake's legs tremble like autumn leaves in a winter wind, and he knew with terrible certainty what ancient thing wore that mask, what timeless horror had been waiting for him all along. Jake tried to scream, to run, but his body refused to obey. He could only stare into the void beneath the king's hood. A high-pitched whine filled his skull as his skin crawled with alien awareness. Understanding flooded his consciousness, the truth of humanity's insignificance, the beautiful horror of Carcosa's eternal dance. And Jake laughed. He laughed as his mind fractured into kaleidoscope shards of madness. He laughed as reality reasserted itself, as paramedics burst into the room, as Sarah wept. He laughed, for he had seen the yellow sign, had answered its call, had become part of something vast and terrible and eternal. His laughter echoed through Carcosa's spires as the last fragments of his sanity dissolved into the void.
And so, dear listeners, the Tattered book closes on this chilling tale of digital temptation and eternal dread. Remember, not all that glitters is gold, and not all that glows yellow leads to fortune. In Carcosa, the king in yellow still waits, and his sign glows eternal in the virtual void. If you dare to delve deeper into these eldritch mysteries, subscribe to our podcast, leave a rating and review, and whisper of our tales to others. Your engagement feeds the book, fueling the terrors yet to come. Until next time, and may your nights be sleepless and your dreams unsettling.